Yo, check this out. This is Wayne Wonder, representing for Warieka LTV. You see the vision, don't it? See the vision. Warieka LTV. Keep it locked.
No, I'm gonna tell you. We, us as bloggers, these are the issues that we need to address. You understand what I say? You see? Set the path for the youth. Share, like, and subscribe and stay tuned to the channel because I don't know all this. Yes, I. Greetings once again to the mighty name of its Imperial Majesty Emperor Selassie the First. You see it? Yeah. You don't know. Man, I struggle with a broken heart still, you know. But sure. I swear it got man know for deal with them thing there. I don't know. It's a love affair, you know, but I know it's not no, you know what I say. It's a love affair between me and my people them, between me and my race. You know, see, cause you don't know. We don't really love the way how things are going. You know, see it at more time, we learn some things day by day and it kind of, see, sting with more and more. You know, see it. So once I welcome to all viewers and our subscribers. You know, see it. Yeah. If you just manage to watch the thing and you like it, you don't know. Share it. You know, see it. Like it. You know, see it. Yeah. We'll continue with the reading from the book. Born for Death. We'll feature another chapter today. And I'll go some more. I'll go order with a book so that the item can get to it, because you don't know. By now, we're supposed to sell a few off of the shelf. We're supposed to help Larry Gunn sell a few off of the shelf just by reading it, so she herself can't even complain about me reading her book. You know what I say, Delroy, as you know the thing said. So that chapter you now named the anatomy of a posse. And do remember, yeah, I am learning as I go along. I haven't read this book before reading it to you. And the patois, spelling, you know, I'm not familiar with them terms. She just improvised. The author just improvised on her own. So when I myself come across them, you know, I have to observe them and understand them myself. So basically I end up stopping in my tracks to understand what she meant. So I could continue with this passage. See? The anatomy of a posse. That winter faded reluctantly into a typical New York spring. Dreary months when the dream of warmth only teased. Brambles got sick again and again, coughing through one siege of bronchitis after another. When his boss refused to give him a raise, he started moonlighting for his friend, Rock Eye Nesbeth from Southside. Yes, Rock Eye Nesbeth. Mommy, eh? You know, say that's a very rich mommy. Yeah, with his friend, Rock Eye Nesbeth from Southside. Family that. You know, see it. R.I.P. Rock Eye Nesbeth. I think you drop out. Yeah, with friend Rakai Nesbeth, who had an apartment in Crown Heights where he sold crack. His spot was up the street from Delroy's farmer base in Rogers Avenue, and it was doing a brisk business now that the Posse-Duns arrest had opened up the streets to other dealers. We took out his competition, sighed Harry Malone, a dark-haired, mustachioed detective from Brooklyn North Homicide, working on the Edwards case. Malone explained that the rankers had fought what he called a war on two fronts, contending for a drug turf with a troop of African-American dealers called the Wild Bunch and another Jamaican outfit, the McGregor Gully Posse. I talk about the 90s Posse. R.I.P. Apana, because Apana gave him hell to you. Yeah, you know, see, only one of me say give Delroy was the hell. But we don't know. You know, see the media, you know, only can I tell you, I just gully man. You know, see, the gully was based on the corner of Sterling Place and Schenectady Avenue in Crown Heights, a few blocks west of Delroy's corner, and it was still going strong. The posse came from a PNP neighborhood of the same name in Kingston, and its political affiliation made it a natural enemy to the JLP rankers. The war between the two posses turned the corners of Sterling and Schenectady into a battleground. The constant competition for drug turf not only raised the level of gun violence on the street, it also lowered the price of crack. Malone remembered the early days when a vial sold for $20, and Delroy started competing with his rivals by offering 2-for-1 specials on weekends and holidays. Now Rockeye was selling vials for $3 and $5. Crack often replaced money as a medium of exchange. Bramble sometimes traded a few vials for things that buyers had stolen, like Walkmans and videotapes. For a woman in dire need of smoke, the price of a vial was a blowjob. On the freezing stairwell of derelict brownstones along Rogers Avenue, the dealers hunkered down in sweatshirts and goose-down trench coat. Inside the buildings, crackhead loaded their stems with beamed up for a few seconds of euphoria. But even with its grimness, Rogers Avenue somehow reminded me of Central Kingston, perhaps because it had the same aura of faded gentility. A fresh layer of despair laid down over former dreams. The neighborhood had been home to a generation of newcomers, Jews from Eastern Europe, African Americans from the South, and West Indian immigrants. They had taken loving care of the brownstones and turned some of them into elegant homes. But now Crown Heights was bursting at the seams with the children of other diasporas. The Lubavitch Hasidic Jews sequestered themselves on the southern side of Eastern Parkway, and the northern side was posse territory. Delroy had lived above a grocery store on the corner of Rogers Avenue and Lincoln Place, a block north of the Parkway. The windows were empty eyes now, but its second story of faded yellow-sided reminded me of a dwelling perched above a downtown Kingston rum shop. It was near that Delroy's father, a tailor nicknamed Light Pants, had lived when he came up from Jamaica and began selling ganja from the back room of the store. And it was there that someone murdered him in 1982, soon after his son arrived from Southside. Delroy was tried and acquitted for the murder of a man who he said had killed Lloyd. But the word on the street was that Delroy murdered his father and then took over his ganja business. From the grocery store, you could look straight down Rogers Avenue across the East River to Manhattan, where the Art Deco corona of the Chrysler building glittered in the pale winter sunlight. The land of arts, Bramble said one afternoon as we stood gazing at this view by the payphone on the corner that served as an outdoor office for the Jamaican dealers. Dear Yankee boys, competitors work the corners, a block north. The two cadres coexist most of the times, but not always. It was almost time for Brambles to start the evening shift at Rockeye's, so we got some chicken, rice, and peas from Joy's restaurant and headed for the crack house. A steel door opened off the stairway into the second floor apartment, where every window was boarded over. The only light came from bare ceiling bulbs and votive candles that flickered on the mantelpiece, tables, and window sills. They were meant to ward off Obia and the police, a gesture from Rockeye's wife, who was intensely superstitious. You ever see so much candle in your life? Brambles asked, shrugging off his shoulder and checking to make sure that the 9mm was still under the couch cushion where Rockeye kept it. Tall candle, round candle, square candle, you wonder how is any oxygen left in the place to breathe. The walls were decorated with religious iconography from Woolworth, there was a picture of a blonde Jesus praying in Gethsemane, and a Catholic image of the Virgin with her blue robe open to a heart on fire. A funeral parlor calendar was turned to a photograph of Martin Luther King Jr. with part of his I Have a Dream speech printed beneath. Jesus, Mary, and Martin gazed down on the little table by the couch where the cracked vials sat in plastic bowls. The steel door to the hallway started pounding with a buyer's knock. Brambles slipped the vial out and took the money in through a peephole. He said business was good. The place sometimes made as much as a $1,000 a day. But of course, none of this was his to keep. Rockeye paid him when he felt like it, maybe $10 or $20 for a night's work. Brambles hated what he was doing. I have a bleach now like a crackhead, he grumbled, and then they thanked me so mannerly, like when I sell them this poison. He filled the horrors with reading. He loved The Nation, and he also pored over New York's daily and African American papers. But his glaucoma was getting worse, and he dreaded the day when he might be unable to read. Across Brooklyn and Queens, on the other side of freedom, Delroy Edward was languishing in Rikers and waiting for his child. I went to see him often, without Brambles know, and took him bodybuilding magazine and hair care kits. He was wearing his hair in the style of the moment, a jerry curled, faded, shaved close on the side with short curls on top. He was always glad to see me and would give me a broad kiss for the benefit of the other inmates. But we never got into any deep talk because his lawyer had ordered him not to discuss his case. In Brooklyn Federal Court, Judge Raymond J. Deary was hearing pre-trial testimony from 15 Rankers men who had flipped for the prosecution in hopes of lighter sentences for themselves. Judge Deary was a slight, pokish man who was learning some new things on this case, how to decipher Jamaican patois and how to stay unprejudiced when Kenneth Manning told him that he'd paid an Obia woman $15,000 to put a death curse on the judge. Manning's pre-trial testimony was chilling enough anyway. Mr. Edwards' uncle is my brother, so we is like family, Manning told Judge Deary. Speaking of his relationship to Joseph Manning from Southside, I never really got a job. I just around Mr. Edwards. Like, if he wanted to make drugs, I help him make drugs. And if somebody needed a driver to shoot somebody, I say, let's drive together. Detectives from Brooklyn North Homicide were shuttling Rankers inmate back and forth between upstate prison and Brooklyn to testify before the judge. The price of their information often include late-night dinners of jerk chicken with the detectives buying, and the conjugal visits to girlfriend while the officers waited in their cars. Not surprisingly, friendships sometimes develop between detectives and the posse men. I've never had a bond with a gang like I do with these guys, Henry Malone confessed during a lull in the proceeding. I'd have a hard time remembering they were going back to jail. Malone got especially close to a young man named Elvis Mortimer, one of the Rankers soldiers whom he called Delroy's push buttons, because they did whatever the Don said. But now the Don was as good as dead, and his soldiers were facing the justice system on their own. Elvis would call me just to talk at 2 and 3 in the morning, Malone said. My wife asked me when I was going to adopt him. He shook a cigarette out of a crumpled pack and lit it. You know, that's the thing about these Jamaicans. They are very winning. If you had a chance to alter their lives with the personalities they already had, they would have been nice guys. Unfortunately, Delroy got to them first. Now, Jamaica, on a hear that a while ago, here where a white man said in America, now read the chapter there again. Elvis would call me just to talk at 2 and 3 in the morning, Malone said. My wife asked me when I was going to adopt him. He shook a cigarette out of a crumpled pack and lit it. You know, that's the thing about these Jamaicans. They are very winning, infectious. If you had a chance to alter their lives, if they had more opportunity with the tenacity and the confidence that them have with the personality they already had, they would have been nice guys. Unfortunately, Delroy got to them first. See? Yeah. All right. Malone sat forward on the hard wooden bench and took a colored photograph from his wallet. It was a picture of the corpse of Devon Steer, one of the cousins Kenneth Manning executed in Washington after he'd set them up to sell the drugs he had stolen from Delroy. Steer's head was blown apart by the point-blank shot Manning fired from the rear seat of the car in which they were riding. I winced at the photo, and Malone looked gratified. This is what these guys were ultimately about, he said. I guess I have some trouble remembering that sometimes. A flurry of publicity surrounded the posses as Delroy's trial approached. The Treasury Department had drawn up a list with some 20,000 names of Jamaicans living in this country, some of whom had been arrested for nothing more serious than a traffic violation. District Attorney Robert M. Morgatha was using the list to help prosecute suspected posse members, and Jamaicans in New York was infuriated by the stigmatization of a primarily law-abiding and hard-working people. They sought help from the American Civil Liberties Union, which argued that the list violated the civil rights of all Jamaicans in this country. What we object to, said Una Clark, head of the newly formed Jamaican Committee on Civil Rights, is using the word Jamaican in front of drug gangs. No one says Italian mafia or Irish Westies, the name of a notorious Irish gang in the Hell's Kitchen district of Manhattan's West Side. So they shouldn't say Jamaican drug posse either. But others were probing the links between Jamaican's highest-ranking politician and the island's drug posse. In April 1988, Edward Seaga's name was called in a congressional committee investigating Caribbean drug trafficking. The name caller was a convicted marijuana smuggler, Michael Vogel, who said, "You can't operate like the people I know were operating without the head of that island knowing what's happening." Vogel's testimony brought a flurry of denials from Seaga and other Jamaican officials. Less than a year later, Michael Mann became Prime Minister after a relatively peaceful election in which only about 24 people died. Rastafari! Haile Selassie. You know, he had come to New York before the election to drum up support from the Jamaican community there. And I spoke with him after he had given another one of his charismatic speeches at Columbia University. We sat down on a rickety classroom table that kept threatening to break, and he joked about the world slipping out from under us. When I asked him about the posses, though, he lowered his mellow voice to say that they were terribly real and not just some figment of the American imagination. But he was obviously hoping to avoid this subject. His most pressing task was to repair the breach between Washington and the PNP by declaring that he was no longer the fiery socialist of the 70s. He went to visit George Bush at the White House and proclaimed that socialism is dead. Washington responded by cutting the repentant manly some slack, and federal authorities backed off from their earlier statement about links between the posse and Jamaica's politicians. Nobody in Jamaica is benefiting from the posse's activities in the United States, said James A. Williams, an attaché with the Drug Enforcement Administration in Kingston. The money made by Jamaican narcotic traffickers in the U.S. stays in the U.S. The New York press wasn't quite as restrained about the posses when Delroy. You hear the authorities say a while ago, Rasta. The authorities said the money made from the posses stay in the U.S. A big statement that, you know, Rasta, that says a lot, you know. That says a lot. You know, see it. The New York press wasn't quite as restrained about the posses when Delroy's trial opened in the summer of 1989. The Post ran a story under an inch-tall headline, "Jamaican got city hooked on crack." Federal prosecutors Johnny Frank and John Gleeson, who was second seat in the 1986 trial of Mafia Don John Gotti, told the jury that Delroy Edwards deserved a special place in history as one of the first drug dealers to introduce crack to the streets of New York. The defendant listened glumly, wearing a dark grey suit and a maroon tie, which looked strange with his haircut. His court-appointed lawyer, David Gordon, stood up after John Gleeson finished and instructed the jury not to find Edwards guilty just because his associates were vicious, ruthless, horrible people. With admirable understatement, Gordon acknowledged, "This is an upsetting case." I was sitting between the New Day's columnist Jimmy Breslin and a powerfully built Jamaican with a cleanly shaved head. He was wearing paint-splattered work clothes and told me that he'd come to hear the opening summation from this contracting job on Long Island. He introduced himself as Conti Thomas. The Conti was short for Continental, which meant that he was a ladies' man with style. Whispering from time to time, Conti said that he had been a close friend of Delroy's father and that he knew Delroy had killed him. "I didn't come here to support Uzi," he said. "I come to watch him meet his doom. Everything they're going to testify to in this court, we know it on the street long time now. That posse was nothing but scavengers. I'm here to listen about how these guys squandered what they had." One of the first witnesses was Paul Taylor, Delroy's brother-in-law, who testified about the day when 3 officers from the 77th precinct raided the apartment on Rogers Avenue and stole a .38 pistol, a large bag of marijuana, and $1,400 in cash. Prosecutor Johnny Frank asked Taylor if the police had given him a receipt, and his no was lost in the laughter that erupted in the courtroom. Then Taylor described how Delroy had cut his face with a knife when Taylor tried to tell him that he wasn't the thief. Edwards didn't treat his employee well, John Gleeson had advised the jury in his opening remarks. He didn't pay them, he beat them, he shot them. The litany of beating, shooting, and stabbing became monotonous after only a few days of testimony. Sometimes the sheer monotony had an impact of its own. However, coupled as it was with a cool effectlessness that stunned the jury, when Kenneth Manning described killing Devon Steer, one of his soldiers in Washington, it sounded like the steps of a recipe. "I shot him in the head," he told John Gleeson. "Where is his head?" asked Gleeson. "Where in his head?" asked Gleeson. "Back of his head." "How many times did you shoot him?" "Once." The driver of the car panicked when Steer's corpse got wedged in the front seat, but Manning managed to dislodge it as they drove and dumped it down an incline. Then he told the driver to set fire to the car. "What did you do after you found out that the evidence was burned?" Gleeson asked. I don't do nothing. I go to sleep," Manning answered. After the trial was over, a female juror told me that this remark had frightened her so badly that she couldn't sleep for 3 days. The jurors had a similar response to testimony about the murder of Norman Alwood, the African-American teenager who was beaten and tortured to death in a crack house basement. Both Kenneth Manning and Conroy Green was there that night, and they described the murder in grisly detail. How Alwood had begged for mercy while Manning poured boiling water over him, and how Conroy Green had stood off to one side, trying not to listen to his pleas. The lawyers had a sidebar conference with the judge, no doubt, with Judge Derry, about the photograph of Alwood's corpse. By this time, the jury was so rattled that David Gordon requested they not be shown the color shots. There were very few rankers victims who were still alive to testify. One of them was a soft-eyed Jamaican named Rodolph Sims. He wheeled himself to the stand, paralyzed from the waist down by a bullet from one of Delroy's gunmen. Sims had made the mistake of going to a grocery store near the corner of Sterling Place and Schenectady Avenue one night for a hot dragon unchilled stout. He had hung out with the McGregor Gully posse who controlled that corner, but he happened to be there at the wrong time. The gully had just done a drive-by shooting on the Rankers, and Delroy wanted revenge, so he ordered a soldier named Stanley McCall to go to the gully corner and shoot anyone who looks Jamaican. That was Radolph Sims. I shot him 2 or 3 times, McCall said coldly. Then I turned around to where Delroy was watching from across the street. When I got back to the car, he said, "You see that man you shot? When he fell, you should have gone up and put the gun to his head." Someone from the gully posse later told me that Sims' nickname was Pleasure. His brother is the reggae singer Sugar Minott, and he used to do the soundboard of Sugar's performances. At the end of his testimony, Johnny Frank got him to admit, in a voice just above a whisper, that because of his injury, he would never be able to make love again. A collective sigh rippled through the courtroom, and the woman next to me groaned. I went upstairs to the district attorney office with Sims and his sister. He sat in his wheelchair, mopping sweat from his brow. Beneath a jaunty leather cap of red, gold, green, and black, cut into sections like a soccer ball, I asked him whether he could still work the soundboard for his brother. "Sometimes," he said, a tired smile momentarily lighting up his face. Then he looked down at his crumpled legs. "But enough things passed me by now." The trial lasted more than a month, but David Gordon called only one witness for the defense, an expert who testified that the voice on a certain tape recording made by undercover police might not actually have been Delroy's setting up a Renker's drug deal. By the time the trial concluded, the jury had become accustomed to the grisly details of Posse's world. In the opening phase, that courtroom was so tense you could almost sense the jury stop breathing. Judge Deary later told a reporter the sharpness got out of it real fast, and we adjusted to the violence. The reporter said the judge compares the adaptation he perceived in himself and the jury to the adaptation the defendants must have made to actual events. The jury found Edwards guilty on all 42 counts of the indictment, and they were so nervous after delivering their verdict that the foreman asked if anything could be done to protect them from reprisal. Judge Derry later sentenced Delroy Edwards to 501 years without parole, and for good measure gave him a federal fine of over $1 million. The rest of the Renker's defendants went to jail. One of them was Conroy Green, the soft-spoken posse enforcer who was present at the Alwood slaying and also confessed to killing 3 of the Renker's other victims. After the trial was over, Harry Malone gave Green my phone number, and he started to call me from the prison in upstate New York. He put me on his list of visitors. Sorry. Yeah, he put me on his list of visitors, which took some time to be cleared by the prison authorities because Green was in the Federal Witness Protection Program. Just before Labor Day, he called to say that I could come meet him. The guards left us alone in an empty visiting room, its windows tilted open to the sound of bird songs from the yard. We began talking about his youth in Kingston and what it had been like to grow up in the PNP neighborhood of Dunkirk. Brambles had a brother who lived there, so he and I used to drink in its rum shops from time to time. Conroy remembered the neighborhood as a fairly peaceful place until the 70s when it started fracturing along the usual political fault lines. He had watched his Dunkirk friends get sucked into the violence, but his hard-working parents had done their best to keep him out of trouble. They saw what was coming before the 1980 bloodbath, so they left Kingston and went to Albany, New York. Conroy joined them just after the election and finished high school and a year of community college then. He had 2 children with a woman there, and the first serious fight he got into was with a man who had made a pass at her. He came back with a gun. Even the youngest youth coming out of Jamaica, he might never have held a gun, Conroy said. But if you put him in a situation where he is threatened, he's going to retaliate in a way that's real cold, like a ragamuffin. Conroy joined the ragamuffin ranks with a string of arrests from assault and armed robbery. To escape prosecution, he left Albany for Brooklyn in the summer of 1986. His cousin in New York was tied with an executioner from the Shower posse named Carl Dunstrom, also known as Fabulous. No one knows how many people Fabulous killed, but an ATF agent estimated that it was close to 100 after tallying Dunstrom's election period homicides in Kingston with the murders he later did for the Shower in the United States. Fabulous was finally sentenced to life without parole for his part in killing 4 people in Landover, Maryland in 1988. You know, see it. So the police know, say, American police, the American authority knows, say, a lot of showermen tied into the political violence of the 80s. How? I mean, if Jamaica and law enforcement haven't got these men down as wanted men for such crimes, you know, which I don't, well, we know how them know, but we could continue with it. You see it. Although the Ranker's posse was distinct from the Shower, both came from the same side of the political fence, and the old ties between Southside and Tivoli Guard meant that the men from these 2 posses moved easily with one another. So Conroy saw Fabulous from time to time in Brooklyn, and he got to hear Fabulous brag about his work. Some Jamaicans are truly crazy, Conroy moves. They think that when you murder, you get big and broad. Some of them really get high off it. Some of them do it just for the intimidation. Conroy's cousin knew Delroy Edwards too, and he introduced Conroy to him in the summer of 1986. At that time, meeting Conroy saw only a young Jamaican like himself. At that first meeting, Conroy saw only a young Jamaican like himself, who was already at Don in Brooklyn, and figured that it wouldn't be that hard to do what Delroy did. He soon joined the Rankers and became the man Delroy relied on to help discipline his unruly soldiers. This discipline sometimes meant murder. His first killing came when Delroy ordered him to snuff a Ranker's worker who had been selling fake crack and stealing the real thing. I shot him and I saw him fall, Conroy remembered, with a faraway look in his eyes. Then I was going to shoot him again, but I said nah and got the hell out of there. I drove up to the store to tell Delroy, and his fucking face lit up. All I saw was teeth. I asked Conroy if he felt remorse for what he had done, and he floundered with the question for a while. Then, by way of an answer, and perhaps to convince me and himself that he had not always acted without decency, he told me a story that turned out to be even more chilling than the chronicle of violence he'd already set forth. It was about a robbery in Philadelphia in the summer of 1987, when Delroy had heard about a Jamaican ganja dealer there who supposedly had a huge stash of weed. He sent Kenneth Manning and Conroy Green to steal it. We went into this house and the guy was home, so we tied him up and beat the hell out of him, and still he wouldn't talk. All we got was 5 bags of marijuana and some guns. The guy kept saying he didn't have any money. There was a lady there with a baby, and Kenneth wanted to rape her. Real young baby, maybe 6 months old. I kept telling Kenneth no, that the police would be on us if he did it. And so he held him back. And so we held him back. That was the only thing that stopped him. I was holding that baby the whole time because his mother was tied up and he was screaming and panting and the mother was sitting, just sitting. Conroy's dead cool description of the terror of this mother and her baby was more unsettling to me than the scene itself. So why did you feel like you had to stop Kenneth from raping her? I asked, knowing that fear of the cops was not the reason. I don't know, Conroy answered, showing some emotion for the first time that day. Her baby was a boy, a nice little baby. He looked just like my son. The afternoon shadow was lightening on the prison lawn, and a guard came in to say that our time was almost up. I was still thinking about the effects of living with violence, remembering the reporter who said that perhaps the way Judge Derry and the jury adapt to hearing about the rankers vicious mirrored the defendant's own adaptation. I was struggling to reconcile the stories Conroy had told me with the quiet, reflective man who sat next to me now. So I asked him one last question: if there was something unique about Jamaica's political violence that had conditioned him for the killing he did later in New York. Being from Jamaica, you see it growing up, he answered. You see it all your life. Even before I kill somebody, I felt like I killed before. When I shot at people, I felt like I did it before. It wasn't like I was trembling and asking, what is this I'm doing? It was like I was into it all along. And I think that's just from social settings, from growing up around all that violence, the way Jamaica was with politics, the way it was when I was just a youth coming up. And once you get up to New York, you find that being affiliated with Jamaican politics, you get stronger because of the reputation it carries. People respect you more and don't mess with your territory. The guard returned and I began collecting my notes and tapes, Conroy said as a parting thought, the police wouldn't have bothered with us so much if it wasn't for the murders we did. They have this big charade about the war and drugs, but it's only that, a charade. We hugged goodbye. Conroy mentioned that the West Indian parade down Eastern Parkway was coming up next week. Go for me, he said. I went with Brambles, who had never seen the annual Labor Day Carnival that draw more than 1 million revelers to Eastern Parkway. Conti Thomas, the Jamaican boulevardier I'd met at the Rankers trial, called a few nights before the parade and told me to come check him at the basement social club where he played dominoes and drank with his friends. Brambles was overwhelmed by the crowd bath on the parkway, so packed with people that we were lifted off our feet and carried along by the throng pressing forward with the floats and dancers and the steel band throb. Fearful about guns in a crowd of such size, he was glad to take refuge in the hole, Conti's basement spot. It was cooler down there. Conti was nursing a white rum, pacing himself for the night that lay ahead. There was only one other woman in the room, and I caught her eye. She was arguing passionately with an old Jamaican about the novel of Charles Dickens. No, man, she cried above the sound of a boombox and several domino games. You are wrong on that, Pip is in great expectation, not Oliver Twist. I walked over to her and said something disingenuous about a level in English literature. What do you mean? Oh, A level in English literature. What you mean, A level? She said, tossing her elegant, fine-boned head. I went to the University of the West Indies. I went to the University of the West Indies at Mona. When? I asked. I got my degree in 1975, she answered, breaking into a grin, before you were born. Her name was Shanda, and she was just 6 years younger than I. but the years in Brooklyn had aged her. Conti tried to draw me aside and say something about her crack smoking, but Shenda gave him a shove and pulled out a chair for me at the table where she was sitting. I asked her where she had grown up, and she said that her people were Maroons from Moortown, a village in the Blue Mountains, but that her parents had brought her up in the sleepy green parish of Hanover, halfway between Nigel and Montego Bay. Moortown is one of the villages found by the slaves who ran away with Nanny, the legendary chieftainess of the Maroons. Shenda laughed joyously when I repeated the story about how Nanny took the British cannonballs into her pum-pum and fired them back. That's a myth. Yeah, that's a myth. I don't know where this woman learned that and keep repeating it. Second time see it in the book. Cannonball and a pum-pum. Eh? How can I cannonball them there? How can I disrespect the woman pum-pum there? I want to talk. How can I eat that thing? How that woman here, man? They are mythifying the legend of Nanny to make the whole sequence of time seem like a myth when Jamaican kicked the British ass and taught them many lessons in war, like guerrilla warfare, camouflage, gears, and ambush and things like that. So I could continue with the reading anyway. They are trying to distort that history. They used to wear red coats while Jamaican African slaves wear camouflage in the bush there, and I mash them up with big stone. Yeah? So when I'm bringing this Nanny catch cannonball in her pum-pum, well, hey woman, your pum-pum can hold a cannonball in the Rasta? Eh? Eh? Why you even think to repeat this thing in a book like this where you're right? Eh? A cannonball pum-pum you have Larry gun. So can I hear that argument that man? Come on man, sure. She had wrapped her head in a traditional bandana for the parade, and the bare light bulbs in the club ceiling were glinting off her high cheekbone. When I told her that she looked very much like the way I imagined Nanny, she stopped laughing. Let me tell you something, she said softly. If those ship captains who stole my people out of Africa had to deal with me, there would have been no slavery. No, man. Slavery would have died right then and there. Shenda was living with her Jamaican boyfriend in his mother's brownstone, a few blocks away, and she gave me her phone number before Conti motioned Brambles and me over to his domino game. The men were talking about the Renkas triad. They had all known Lloyd Edwards, and they were glad that Lloyd's son had gotten his comeuppance at last. Delroy Edwards, Conti said, studying the layer of the dominoes before he made his next move. Everybody forget about this guy already. All they want to know is why all the killings? What did they get out of it? Anywhere you turn, at the racetrack, in the bars, there's nobody to give him sympathy. There's not one man or woman in the street have one good thing to say. Everybody was afraid of them. They destroy more people's life than they ever helped anybody. He whacked the wooden table hard with a domino and smiled. He and his partner was going to win this game. If you're gonna go bust shot, you're gonna bust shot by your own brother and sister. If you're gonna make war, go somewhere else. Why black have to make war against black? Why Jamaican have to make war against Jamaican? This whole posse thing is so blind and dumb and ignorant. We're not dealing with slavery now. We are in America. We're in America now. Yes, so the end of that chapter, that chapter was called The Anatomy of a Posse. See it? So next one, a Sesame Street, yes, sir. Seen Try G Brown. Moving on strongly. See it? Yes, sir. So we give thanks. Remember to share, like, and subscribe. See it? Yes, sir. Tell a friend and tell a friend. Go the thing. Rastafari.